Today on Nova Legends podcast, I have former George Mason and Colorado basketball coach Joe Harrington, a guy I got a chance to see a lot when I was growing up next to George Mason University back in the early 80s. Welcome to the podcast, Coach.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I've never been on your podcast. I'm impressed with you, how thorough you are. You sent me that list of things to go over, and you know a whole lot about me.
Well,
I have to correct something. I also coached at Long Beach State.
Oh, that's right.
And Hofstra.
Yeah.
And the Toronto Raptors. So.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Well, I got to add one more. I coached at Wakefield High School, and I coached AAU girls basketball. So I've covered the whole spectrum.
Yeah. Well, say I was thorough, but I wasn't that thorough.
That's all right. That's quite all right.
Well, Coach, I was going to reach out to you because I know you. I'm friends with Mike Dufrene, Coach Dufrene, and I know you coached Mike. But then I saw you again this week on the ACC tournament special, which I really enjoyed. And you were talking about those golden 70s years at University of Maryland when you guys played NC State and what some consider the greatest game ever. So I was like, man, I got to reach out to Coach because I had forgotten you were there for all those great games.
Yeah, I worked for Coach Driesell for 10 years, probably the longest any assistant coach has worked for him. Not that all of them didn't leave, but I just enjoyed working with Coach Driesell.
Yeah, I'm pretty good friends with another guy that worked for Coach Oliver Purnell. I actually did a podcast of Oliver. I'm sure you know Oliver pretty well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Well, let's go back. Let's go back to Maine. I never knew lots of great ball players back from Maine. So why don't you tell us about how you got started in basketball and what part of Maine you're from?
Well, I grew up on a coastal town called Phippsburg, Maine. At the time, there was only about 600 residents. But I went to school in Bath, Maine, in Morris High School. That's on the coast near Portland. And I started basketball. This is quite a story, but there was a lobsterman in our town that just liked basketball. And he started taking us in the winter. He drove us up in his back of his lobster truck. We'd go up to the YMCA and play on Sundays. And that's how it started. And I became friends with one of the players from that YMCA league, Rick Woods, and we just developed a friendship, and we got a whole group of players. We started playing together in the 7th grade, and as it turned out, we won championships, and I was high school All-American, parade All-American, and we played the New England championships, and then later on I got inducted into the Maine State Basketball Hall of Fame, the inaugural class. So I had a good career in a small town in Maine, and it led to being an assistant coach and a head coach at a lot of different places. I've done a lot of things that maybe I'm not a Hall of Fame coach, but I've done a lot of things that a lot of people. I've been blessed. I've coached at 4 different Division I schools and coached in the NBA, and I have a lot of great feelings for George Mason just because it was really the first. Well, that wasn't my first job. I worked at Hofstra for 1 year, but I came to George Mason. They were starting a Division I program. And it was an exciting time. I really enjoyed my years at George Mason. And I hired a coach named Rick Barnes as my first assistant coach. You all know about Rick. And then Jerry Dunn was another assistant coach at the time. I had 2 assistant coaches, and Jerry went on to become the head coach at Penn State. And then I hired Derek Wittenberg, who I had known for many years just because he used to come over to Cole Fieldhouse when I coached with Coach Driesell, and Witt would be running the steps and working out. We became good friends, and I gave him his first job in college coaching, and then he went on to be my assistant at Long Beach State and also Colorado. So we've had a lifelong friendship.
And he was involved in producing that movie, the documentary on the ACC, wasn't he?
Exactly. And he did the ESPN
30 for 30 for Valvano.
He also did one on Coach McCartney from the University of Colorado football coach.
Oh, that was amazing. I didn't know Wittenberg did that. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Oh, that was a tremendous film. Yeah.
Yeah, it really was. Well, before we get there, so what was your playing style? Because I looked at the Maryland roster from those days, and you were a 6'5" center. Is that correct?
Well, out of high school, I was a 6'5" center, but when I went to college, I played kind of guys weren't as tall then. I was a forward,
Mhm.
you know, three or four man.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we had good teams. Gary Williams was my teammate. He was a point guard on that team.
mhm.
And we had some good teams, and the ACC was probably just as tough then as it is now.
Mhm.
But it was a good choice coming to the University of Maryland.
Well, how did they find you in the first place? I know the coach's name was a guy named Millikan, Bud Millikan, which I don't know anything about. How did he find you? Why did you decide to go to Maryland?
That's a very interesting question. The freshman football coach at the University of Maryland at the time had coached football, high school football in Portland, Maine. And that was a link that Coach Millikan, got wind of me in Maine from Coach Carol Huntress. And at the time I had narrowed it down to 3 schools. I'd heard from like 200 schools, and it was down to Boston College, who Bob Cousy was going to be the next coach there. And then University of Cincinnati and Maryland. But I learned a very, very valuable recruiting lesson during that time. The mothers decide where their sons go to school, because my mother wanted me to go to University of Maryland, and that's how it ended up.
Why did she want you to go farther away from home?
She just had a lot of confidence in being near Carol Huntress, and she liked the coaches at Maryland. They were just very down to earth, and she had a lot of confidence in them.
In terms of your playing style, who were your role models back then? I mean, this is before YouTube and ESPN. Who did you try to play like? It's
You mean,
as a player coming into college?
It's really amazing. I came to Maryland. They played more of a slow down offense, but I now prefer a fast break and the defense. But Bud Millikan was a very sound defensive coach, and I learned some good things from him, and as did Gary Williams in his career. But he was a Hank Iba. People may not know that, but he was a Hank Iba. He played for Hank Iba, so he was very tough with his man-to-man defense. We didn't play much zone. And
So
the offense
Iba was Iowa. He was an Iowa legend, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, no, maybe it was Oklahoma State.
Okay.
Yeah, he was. I think Eddie Sutton was good friends with him. But anyway, so I played in the slow down style, but I'd prefer to play a upbeat, style of basketball. But I didn't even think about that when I was being recruited. It's just tough. I kind of wanted to go to Cincinnati because Ed Jecker was the head coach, and they had won 2 national championships, and they were graduating a player named Ron Bottom, and I was supposed to take his place, and but it didn't work out that way.
You would have missed Oscar Robinson, though, right? He would have been before you.
He was before me, but I had breakfast with him.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
That was part of the recruiting spiel,
What was College Park? What was College Park like in those days?
Well, it was, what, the university or the basketball, or?
Yeah, the university. What was the university like? What was it like? Was it it's pretty grown up now. It's, brand new buildings, brand new gym.
Totally changed. We were like 16 or 17,000 students at the time. And where they had the Infinity Center or the arena now for basketball was just a pasture. I could see it from my dormitory window, And my roommate all through college was a guy named Jay McMillan. You've heard of Tom McMillan, I assume.
Of course, yeah.
And that was Tom was his older brother, and that was my first basketball recruit, and probably my in to start working with Coach Driesell, just because I was so close to the McMillan family.
It's interesting. They didn't really mention his older brother. They talked about him, Tom, being recruited by Maryland, and what a big coup it was for Lefty. But I don't remember in the movie talking about that his older brother had played there.
Yes, and Tom would sit on a bench during our games in Cole Fieldhouse. And during those days, Julian, Cole Fieldhouse was not like it was in the later years. But Coach Driesell, when we played at Maryland, there was about, 18 or 20 feet between the bench and where the stands started. It was kind of a stands were behind you and seated like 12,500. But when Coach Driesell played in 2 Eastern Regional playoffs in Cole Fieldhouse, and they would bring in all these risers and chairs and tables, and it became a closed-in venue. And so when Coach Driesell came to Maryland and we're getting ready to play the first game, he went to the athletic director, Coach Keogh, and he says, Jim, he said, Coach, we need to get, we need the stands down on the floor. And Coach Keogh said, well, we can't do that, Coach Driesell, because there are PE classes in there until 3:30 in the afternoon. And the maintenance people cannot get that set up for a game that evening. So Coach Driesell, being not wanting to be saying, no, I can't do this. He said, well, I'll make a deal with you, Jim. He said, if I can put this down for the first game in time, he said, will you do it thereafter? And so the first game, Coach Driesell had the maintenance people put all these risers down. It was like a couple thousand seats and tables and everything. And we had the pep committee, assistant coaches. Coach recruited a gang of people to put all these chairs down on the floor. And we started at 3:30. We had it done by 5:15. And the game wasn't until 8 in those days. And so that's how Cole Fieldhouse changed. And I think it made a huge difference for Coach Driesell and later on for Gary Williams to win a national championship. So Cole Fieldhouse was different. That's a good question you answered. You asked.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your teammates. When you first came into the ACC, it was all white. There was not a single black player in the ACC. There were black players at other major basketball programs like UCLA and Cincinnati and up north, and some of the other Southern schools had begun to get black players. But ACC is one of the last conferences to have a black player. But Maryland had it first, and his name is Bill Jones. Do you remember much about Bill, and what are some of the things you remember about like the way he was treated?
In that recruiting class, there were 2 black players, Billy Jones and Julius Johnson, Pete. And he, bless his soul, he passed away several years ago. But that first year, it was only Billy Jones going on the road. Pete wasn't eligible to play that first year. And Billy was, I didn't think much of, I didn't think much of the situation at the time, but we'd go down to Durham or Clemson or Columbia, South Carolina, and sometimes we'd change venues. We might be in one hotel, go to another, or we'd change restaurants. And I never really, at the time, Coach Millikan was the perfect person to bring a black player into the Atlantic Coast Conference. And Billy Jones was such a great gentleman, a great athlete. And but I remember that things changed. Our plans changed on the road, and I noticed it, but I didn't put it all together until later. And Billy Jones handled it very well. He was a class guy, and he was the right person at the right time for that situation.
So you didn't there weren't things he went through that you saw torture him. You seemed to handle it all in stride for what you remember.
Absolutely. I mean, I just remember going into Durham and there was a water fountain that said whites only, and I just, it bothered me. And I know that we'd get some calls from the stands when we went into some of the venues in the South, and Billy never was, he was never down about it. I mean, he didn't even talk about it. We went on and played our game and then, traveled, and it was never a big issue within the Maryland family. And he handled it really well. I mean, and we had a football player at the time, Darrell Hill, who, did the same for football. And they were 2 class guys. And they were the right people to do it. They really were.
Had you played with black players up in Maine before? Like maybe one of the all New England teams, or?
No, in the state of Maine, I played against 2 black athletes in my whole high school career. One from Brunswick, was a naval base there, and there's up in Bangor, there's another naval base up there, and that was it until we got to the New England playoffs. When we played in the New England playoffs, I mean, Rindge Tech and teams from Connecticut, and it was. But it never dawned on me that it was any different. It just competing. That's kind of how it was.
Well, did the style of play in the ACC noticeably change when you add a lot of more athletic type, African-American type players? I mean, I don't mean to stereotype, because black players come in many different sizes and packages, and so do white players. But did the style of play change in the ACC noticeably?
Well, I watched that ACC film you alluded to earlier, and Everett Case played a very fast style of basketball. But I didn't play against Everett Case team. He retired the year before I became a sophomore.
He was the NC State coach.
He was NC State coach. But in looking back on it, that was really the one team that ran. They emphasized the fast break. You know, I don't remember Frank McGuire, but you know, Dean Smith started playing faster as he got going. You know, he was very disciplined initially, but I think Dean was like Mike Krzyzewski. They would adjust to the times, to the style of plays and everything. And I think that's why those two guys were such great coaches, because they didn't stick with one thing. They were able to adjust to the style that needed to play to win. And as the black athletes came into the ACC, it did change. And but you know, I didn't realize that when you think about it, the ACC tournament was the only tournament in college basketball for conferences for like 20 years.
I didn't know that.
They were the first TV people. I mean, we were the University of Maryland. Coach Driesell started this with a guy named Russ Potts, who was the head of our sports marketing. But we started a national TV game on Super Bowl Sunday, and that started because it wasn't a big deal then to be on TV, or Chesley Network that did the ACC broadcast was really the first one that did college basketball. But Russ Potts and Coach Driesell started this Super Bowl Sunday broadcast, and that was that changed things.
Yeah,
in TV, and I think it evolved. Yes, but I'm getting off track. But it evolved as the better black players and all players that came into the ACC. They started playing faster basketball, and I think Dean Smith and Everett Case, and then when Norm Sloan came in there, because he played at NC State, they started playing faster basketball.
Yeah.
You know, and Coach Driesell liked to play fast basketball, so it was pretty good.
So I talked to Barry Parkhill, one of the first great players at UVA, and I asked him how Al Drummond was treated. He was the first black player at UVA. UVA was the last school in the ACC to have a black player, surprisingly enough. Okay. And I said, how was he treated? And he said, I didn't notice anything, but we all were treated badly at University of Maryland. He said he had never seen anything like it. You go to University of Maryland, and the crowd was insane. And who else said? I think Bob McKegg, another UVA player, said the same thing. He said the UVA, University of Maryland, your fans would just torture the opposing team.
I see there's a great rivalry between Virginia and Maryland, the neighboring states, but it's I think maybe football started it, because I don't recall what happened, but I guess Virginia knocked off Maryland in a last game of the season football, and it kept them out of a big bowl game, and the Virginia fans are waving white handkerchiefs during the game, and I think that started a lot of the bitterness, if you will, and the rivalry. But it was I never knew that they felt that way. I mean, I guess when you're on the game, I get a little oblivious to it. You just kind of, focus on basketball. But
yeah, were you happy with your playing career at University of Maryland?
Well, I got hurt my junior year at Clemson, and that kind of stymied everything. But I ended up being drafted by the Celtics, and you gotta live your life forward. You can't look back and have regrets, because you can't change it. You can just learn from it and move on. So, no, I'm glad that I went to the University of Maryland. It led to, being there when there was a coaching change, and to work with Coach Driesell, one of the great coaches of, what can I say? He's just an all Hall of Fame coach. And, it was a good decision.
Yeah. What did you think about Lefty, Coach Driesell, when you first met him? I mean, he must have seemed like a character, or maybe that's just how he appears in the media.
That's part of media hype. Yeah. I just remember things that he did. I mean, it was like he said, we worked 5.5 days. His big thing was the harder we work, the luckier we get. That was a little plaque we put on our desk. And he said, I worked 5.5 days and we'd come in on Saturdays and it ended up being a full day.
Yeah.
But he was just very thorough. I was fortunate to have worked with him because he did everything. He wasn't like, well, let the assistants do that. He had his finger in everything from recruiting to basketball camps to where the players lived, to what they ate and the media. I mean, he changed basketball in the Washington, D.C. area. And put it on a, I mean, I just think it helped Georgetown when they hired John Thompson and Lefty believed you could win at Maryland. You could win a national championship. And you probably know this, but when he came there, he said, well, we're going to be UCLA of the East Coast. And that came from Jay McMillan, because when Coach Driesell came up to Maryland to visit, we went out to breakfast with a guy named Jack Heisey, a big alumni, and myself, Coach Driesell, and Jay McMillan. And Jay says to Coach, this is right before Coach had his press conference to announce he was coming to Maryland. Jay McMillan says, Coach, there's no reason we can't be like UCLA is on the West Coast. We could be that on the East Coast. And that just, so when Coach had his first press conference, he said, we're going to be UCLA of the East. That's how it started.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Coach he just believed you could win a national championship at Maryland. And I think he would have. It was just different. That last game we played against NC State in that overtime game, and they went to the national finals. There was only one team from the ACC that went. And they changed that rule the next year, and they started having at-large teams. But, we played NC State close games all the time, but we just couldn't beat them. David Thompson and Tommy Burleson and Monty Tao, they were really a great trio for them, and we're never able to beat him in that ACC tournament. But I just think if under today's rules, I really think that Coach Driesell would have won some national championships, because he had, I don't know, so many teams in the top 10. It's harder to get in the top 10 then than it is now. I mean, because it was just not as many teams. It was just different. We won the NIT that year that McMillan was a sophomore, because he couldn't play freshman then. We won the NIT, and there was, I guess there were 18 teams in the NIT, and in the NCAA there were 25. So we kind of did win a national championship, but things changed after that year.
Yeah. Well, Lefty is not known as an X and O's guy, but are there things you learned X and O's from Lefty that you use as a coach?
Lefty's a darn good coach. Let me tell you, he doesn't get the credit for being a good basketball coach. We played, I mean, a lot of people may know this, but we played at South Carolina earlier in the season that particular year. And there was a huge fight that broke out. And Coach Driesell said, it'll be World War III when they come back to Cole Fieldhouse. And it was jam-packed. There was 16,000 people for that game. But before the game, weeks leading into the game, Coach says, we got to figure out a way to beat South Carolina. They're ranked 2 in the country.
That was John Roach. That was John Roach's team.
Yeah. He said, we'll take Howard White and Jim O'Brien, and we'll make them come out of the zone, and they'll have to guard Jim and Howard. And he said, I'll take Jim and Howard anytime to help our chances to win. So he came up with a plan. He was going to hold the ball until they came out of the zone, and then we were going to play 2-on-2 basketball with it would have 3 guys at half court. Howard White and Jim O'Brien would play man-to-man defense, and they would play half court. They'd play 2-on-2 basically. And so we held the ball. They didn't come out of the zone. Wow. At halftime, Howard White hits a baseline jumper. It's 4-3. We're up. Wow. So there were no 3-point shots in those days. Yeah. So at the end of the game, with 16 seconds to go, we are down 30-25. And John Roach takes the ball out. We had called a timeout after we scored, and we stole the ball and scored. We called timeout again. Stole the ball and scored again. Now it's 30-29, right? And we stole the ball a third time, and Jim O'Brien hits a shot at the buzzer. We win 31-30. Wow. And I think that just changed Cole Fieldhouse, because it was bedlam in there. when that game was over. There was storming the floor. It was unbelievable. But that just shows you, coach always thinks of a way to win. When he was at Davidson, his first game was against Wake Forest. Now, Coach Driesell, they'd never won a game in the Southern Conference, but Coach Driesell, I can still see the chart. He has it to this day, but he has a chart written on the back of a schedule. He had all the players at Wake Forest listed and all the players at Davidson listed. And he said, okay, Julian, you've got to hold your man to 8 points and you've got to score 10. And he had it figured out. And the score was almost identical, but they beat him, coach's first game. And that's just his mind process to come up with a way to win. And so you ask the question, is he a good coach? He's a great coach. He's just a complete coach. And he loved Washington, D.C. because of the media. He said, this is the greatest city one of the greatest cities in the world. He said, we can win here. And it's just, he comes up with this stuff. And that's how Midnight Madness started. One morning he comes in, because every weekend he'd have that pad of paper by his bed and he'd write down things. And so he came in that one fall and he says, boys, we had a coaches meeting. He says, we're going to be the first team in America to practice this year. And he says, we're going to run the mile at 12:01. He said, nobody's going to beat us to have the first practice. So, as it goes, the story goes, we drove the car down on the Bird Stadium field and we had the lights on and we ran the mile. He said, but listen, he said, though the next year we ran the mile, that was, I don't know what year it was, but the next year, Mo Howard says, Coach, let's not run the mile. Let's have a scrimmage and we'll invite all the students to come to the scrimmage. And Coach says, okay, Mo. He said, we'll do that. He said, but you still got to run the mile. Because that was his thing, tradition to run the mile. So that's how it started. And we did every year after that, but it picked up. That's how Midnight Madness started. But Coach is always thinking outside the box. And that's why he was so great, so successful as a Division I coach. I mean, what he did at Davidson was unbelievable to put in his first recruit. And he told him, he said, we're going to be ranked in the top 10 at Davidson, 900 students, all boys, Baptist school that never won a game in the Southern Conference. And he's telling them they're going to win. They're going to be in the top 10 in the country. And they thought that he was nuts, but he did it. Everybody that played for him played in the top 10.
And I can only imagine he must be a phenomenal recruiter. I would think Lefty would be great with the moms, and just charming. And, I want my kid to play for Lefty Driesell.
Well, I got a great story for that one. Not many have heard this, but he was recruiting Fred Hetzel. Okay. And, Will played at Maryland, but he recruited Fred Hetzel and had an in-home visit. And with Mrs. Hetzel and Fred Sr. and Fred Jr. and Coach is sitting on the couch and sofa, and there's a ficus tree right beside to his right. And he looked over and the leaves were wiggling. And it was Mrs. Hetzel's pet snake. So Coach Driesell, he takes a pet snake and wraps it around his neck. Okay. And Mrs. Hetzel says, the coach that was in here last time said, we stomp on those where I'm from. So when Fred Hetzel signed with Davidson, Mrs. Hetzel said, I knew anybody that loved my pet snake would take care of my son.
Yeah. Well, he would have prayed with her or whatever she needed. He would have provided that. I'm sure.
You heard, I don't know if people want to watch this, but we had a big birthday celebration. And it's you can go watch it. It was a podcast like this or on Zoom, but lefty90.com. But in that it went on for like 2 hours. But Albert King mother was so impressed with Coach Driesell because when he went to visit Albert King in Brooklyn, and he lived in a high-rise building, right? He had to walk up about 13 flights of stairs because the elevator was broke. And he walked into the apartment and they had like, I don't know, 7 or 8 people staying there. And he says to Mrs. King, he says, this is the cleanest apartment I've ever been in. because she was really kept things neat. And she was really, really impressed with it. And Albert said that was one of the main reasons he went to Maryland, because Coach Driesell, a white man, okay, sat in her living room and and said that to her, and she just was so impressed with Coach Driesell.
That is so clever that he did that, is that that compliment was the perfect. It was just the perfect approach, and I'm sure he meant it, but it was a perfect.
Well, that's who he is.
Yeah,
he speaks from the heart, and yeah, he did mean it, and she just that rung a bell with her.
Well, you mentioned earlier a player that's a legend for where I'm from. I'm from Northern Virginia. You mentioned Jim O'Brien, and we talk about him like Larry Bird around here. And there's every once in a while you'll hear Jim O'Brien stories. What was he like to coach? He played for folks who don't know. He played for Stewart. I think he was class of '69 or '70.
He would have been the class of 1969.
Okay.
Spring of '69. It was Coach Driesell and Howard White. They were the first recruits to come to Maryland. And Jim was a delight to coach. I mean, he played hard, and he loved basketball. He's a basketball guy. He loved basketball. Uh-huh. And I think they the opponents called him Bozo because he had red hair, and but he was a very talented offensive player. Yeah. And we were really, I know when he signed, we were really happy about that, because that put two good players in that first recruiting class. Howard White, who was like the leading scorer in the state, I think that year, and Jim O'Brien was second or whatever. But those are two great guys to come to Maryland for that first class.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite players and one of my role models when I started, I was class of '84 from Robinson. So I was learning basketball in the '70s, late '70s, early '80s. And the guy I tried to model after was John Lucas. I wasn't a left-hander, but when John Lucas, when he had the ball, he would always run at full speed. Like a lot of times the dribbler will go and he'll turn directions. John Lucas would pick a direction and he would go. You'd have to turn him. And then when he'd go up to score, he was always off pace, a little off rhythm. He knew how to throw the defense off. I learned a lot from watching John Lucas play. He was such a clever player. What was he like to coach?
It's funny. John Lucas is, he wasn't the most athletic player. When you mentioned about him going into the lane to go to score, he couldn't jump over people. I mean, I don't think he could jump and touch the rim, be honest with you. But so he had a knack to shoot. Like his jump shot was a set shot. Mm-hmm. And he'd be driving to his left, driving to his right, using his left hand. I said, John, you need to use your right hand. They're going to steal that ball. But he never changed. Yeah. And he had a quick release, and he knew when to shoot. He just had a great feel for the game. And you're right about him going coast to coast. That was part of our fast break. And Sonny Allen was the coach at Old Dominion at the time. We ran
fast break, numbered fast break.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very good, Julian. But that's what we ran. And John Lucas, he went right straight to the hole, and then McMillan would be trailing. And so that's why he always went right at people. And the next recruit followed John Lucas at the point was Brad Davis.
Yeah, great shooter.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he played in the NBA like 12 years. But he at the time when he played North Carolina, they pressed a lot, right? Mm-hmm. We loved it because John Lucas and Brad Davis went right coast to coast, and they stopped pressing us because they couldn't stop either one of those two guys. Yeah. So I think it was, so you asked about John going coast to coast. We got it because that's how we attacked people. Yeah. Because John could get by people. He just knew how to do it. And our fast break was that way. So it's played right into our hands when people pressed us.
Yeah. What about Tom McMillan? He was like this gangly. I remember when he played for the Bullets, he had this gray hair. He looked like a senator. I think he actually ran for office at some point too. But he was not the most athletic guy in the world with these really long arms and good shooter. But he was amazingly effective. What did you think about Tom McMillan?
Tom McMillan, there's another player that really wasn't athletic, because he was strong, but he wasn't an athletic, like a Ron James or at the time Len Baez. He just wasn't didn't have that type of body. but he was very, very smart, and he knew what he could and couldn't do. Like if he had in the lane, he had two moves. He had his strong move going to the baseline, then he had a move coming back to the middle. He figured it out. Yeah. And he just made himself a great player. I mean, he just ended up being the all-time leading scorer, played in the NBA 12 years. And he just was very smart. Like I'm close with him today, and we talk about basketball quite a bit. And he said, I used to give Kareem Jabbar fits, because Kareem would want to get to a certain spot on the side of the lane so he could, get into his sky hook. And he said, I would pick up Kareem at half court and I'd bump him. I'd never let him get comfortable or get to that spot he wanted to get to. And he said, Kareem might get, 20 or whatever, but he was always below his average. He said, I gave Kareem fits. So he thinks he's a thinker. He's a cerebral basketball player. And he's I think that's why he stayed and played so long. Yeah. But he was at Maryland. You asked about Tom McMillan, but at Maryland, Len Elmore and Tom McMillan, they were perfect for each other. They just complemented each other. What Tom didn't have, Lenny had in terms of skills. So it was a great combination.
Yeah. Was it a tough decision for you to leave Maryland and all these top 10 type recruits that you'd get, or at least top 100, and you took a job at Hofstra? Was that a tough decision to make?
No, it was time to become a head coach. And my first job actually I got the job at Hofstra because of a wrestling coach. I was a phys ed major at Maryland, and Sully Krause was the head wrestling coach. And the AD at Hofstra was a wrestling coach. And that kind of like, he called Sully Krause about me, and that one thing led to another, and that's where I went. But I'll tell you another great story, Julian. You can use it or not, but
I'll use it.
At Cole Fieldhouse, it was on the nights of wrestling matches, they had to bring down the mats, these big roll out the mats, and get ready for the meet. And on those nights, we practiced until 5:30 or whatever. And Sully Krause asked Coach Driesell if he could roll the mats out and get him ready, so as soon as we finished practice, he could get the mats out there in the middle of the court and everything, and get them ready for the match. And so Coach says, yeah. He said, we'll take down one of the baskets and roll the mats out, and I'll finish practice at the other end. And then when we're finished, you'll be ready to go. So we finished practice. It was this one time, and the mats were out there on the floor of Cole Fieldhouse. And we finished our meeting, finished practice, and a player named Owen Brown, he looks at Coach Driesell, and I got to tell you a story first. Coach Driesell coached high school basketball. He went to Granby High School. Yeah, and that's a great wrestling school. And there's a wrestling move called the Granby Roll. All right, you need to know this for this story. So anyway, Owen Brown says, Coach, he said, I'd like to get you on that mat and pin you. And Coach says, I don't know, he's in his late 30s. He said, well, come on, Owen, let's do it. And the team was going crazy. And they huddle around the mat. And Coach Driesell says, Owen, he said, I'll tell you what. He said, I'll give you the advantage. I'll take the down position first. So Coach gets down on all fours, and he said, Owen, now put your arm around me real tight. He said, and so Owen put his arm around him real tight. And Coach Driesell says, well, somebody say go. So somebody in the team says go. And Coach Driesell grabbed Owen Brown's arm, and he rolled him right over and pinned him in about a second. And the place was going crazy, the team. And Coach Driesell stood up, and he winked at me, and he said, the old Granby roll got him. Yeah, I'll never forget that.
Yeah, he won a state championship as a player at Granby. That's good. It's a great story. Well, Coach, you got any more Maryland stories before we go to hospital?
They'll come up.
Okay. You can always go back. Yeah. So I went to University of Maryland basketball camp when I was a kid. I went for 2 years, and my counselor. Yeah. So you were there those years, but my counselor was Randy Owens that played at Hofstra. Is it Randy
Oh,
Owens?
he played Ohio State, didn't he?
No, I had a player. No, Larry. He played at Hofstra. That was the guy at Philadelphia Textile. My counselor played for you at Hofstra. It was Larry Taylor. Larry Taylor.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a Larry Taylor that played for you at Hofstra?
David Taylor.
David Taylor. David Taylor. He was my counselor at University of Maryland for my team. You know, he was the one who ran our team. And I still have a picture. I'll send it to you. I got a picture of us together.
Yeah, I ran that camp for Coach Driesell. He was he just figured it out how to run basketball camps. He was really good at it. I'll tell you another story now. The reason you had David Taylor, because he was the best player in that conference. He was freshman of the year and all. And Coach Driesell, I ran the camp, and he said, Joe, he said, I want you to hire the best college basketball players in the country for our counselors. Get as many good ones as you can, because at night I want our players to play against these players in the counselor games. So I hired, counselors. The one guy I hired was an All-American at Indiana named Butch Carter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Butch and I, we became friends. This was in the mid 70s?
Yeah.
Early 70s. So Butch Carter worked for us, and we kind of remained friends. And then when I got the job at Long Beach State in 1987, I think it was about a year later, Derek Wittenberg left, and I needed to hire an assistant coach. And Butch Carter called me, and I hired Butch to work as my assistant. He stayed with me one year, and then he went back and worked with Jim O'Brien at Dayton. But anyway, 20 some years later, in 1999, 1998, Butch Carter is in line to get the head basketball job for the NBA Toronto Raptors. And he hired me as an assistant coach.
Wow. So
that's just a lesson for young coaches to build your network, because you never know how important it is. So a person I met 20 some years before hired me to work in the NBA.
Yeah.
And that's just, you just never know about life.
Yeah. It's less, not just for coaches, but for anyone. I'm in sales. You always got to try to improve that network, increase that network.
Yeah.
You
didn't ask this, but I'm just really impressed with the new coach at George Mason, Kim English.
Yeah.
I was at his press conference just because Rick Barnes and I were so close, and we still are. And I wanted to meet Kim. I'd met him. He's got a great background working for Rick Barnes and the coach at Colorado, who's done well, and then at Missouri. And I just think he's going to be one of the great coaches in this next generation of coaches, if you will. And he's had some tough losses this year, but he'll learn from it, and he'll get really good. He's a terrific guy, and I think really going to be an even better coach as time goes along.
He's got a really strong presence on the bench during games.
He does, but I'm not saying he's a dreamer, but he just believes in himself. He believes in his players, and his confidence and enthusiasm is just infectious with that team. And they're still playing hard, even though they've lost, I guess, 15 games this year, but they're still getting after it.
Seems like he'd be a great recruiter. So I agree. I think he's going to do. I think Mason's lucky to have him. But let's talk about you. Why did you decide to come to George Mason? At the time, they played in what was basically a high school gym. It was the George Mason. I guess it was called George Mason College. Maybe it had just become George Mason University. So it's enormous. What's that?
Go ahead.
No, I say it's an enormous school now, but it was very much a commuter school. How did it come about?
Bob Epskamp was the athletic director, and I think I fit what he was looking for, because I been an assistant coach at ACC school, and I went to Maryland. I was very familiar with the total area when it came to basketball and the coaches, and I just think it fit what he was looking for at the time. And but you're right about George Mason. It was a high school gym. We didn't even have a locker room. And we didn't have a weight room. We kept our weights in a janitor's closet and put them up at 5:30 in the morning. Rick Barnes and I ran our weight training from a janitor's closet, But it was we had a small space in a trailer for an office, and it was just it wasn't a Division I program at the time. It wasn't on paper, but it really wasn't. But we believed we'd win, and our dreams were big. And there was a guy, the president was George Johnson,
Mhm.
and he had a great vision for that school. And that's how the Patriot Center got there. He changed that school from a commuter school into what it is today. And but we just felt we could win. And I hired Rick Barnes. This is a heck of a story, but I'd never met Rick Barnes. I didn't even know Rick Barnes. But the two assistant coaches at Maryland were people I trusted and knew, and they convinced me to interview Rick Barnes and to hire him. And I interviewed him, and I love Rick. And he came to George Mason. That was his first full-time basketball job in college basketball. And we were a good fit. And at the time, I mean, I pushed hard to get a new office, get a new locker room, and get some things changed. And we just thought we'd come in and beat James Madison, who was hot then. And we recruited some very good players. Rob Rose and John Niehoff was our point guard, and that's quite a story how he ended up at George Mason, and then Ricky Wilson. But we could not beat Navy. David Robinson. We tried to get David Robinson to come to George Mason, but he goes to Navy and he grows 6 inches in a year, and he's 7 feet, and he just dominated us. We had great games against him. I mean, Carlos Yates was incredible, but we couldn't beat Navy. It just couldn't get done. And as it turns out, I guess we all know why.
Yeah.
NBA player David Robinson, but it was an exciting time for us at George Mason. It was a good fit for me, and we just felt we could beat the teams in that league and go to the NCAA playoffs. It never happened. We did win the first postseason game in the NIT, so I was really proud that team did that.
Well, John Niehoff was a left-handed guard, about 5'11". He went to Lee High School in Springfield, and it's now Lewis High School. And he was a very savvy guard. In high school, he used to back his opponent down. He would pivot one way and pass or shoot. Very clever guard. I was a big fan of him. I was 4 or 5 years behind him, but I'd watched him play a lot. I love the way he played. And how did he end up at George Mason?
His high school coach called me and said, "Well, I've got a player that could help you." And
Charlie Thompson.
Yeah, Charlie, he called and he said, I said, "Well, who is he?" He said, "John Niehoff." He said, "He's just a 5'10" guard." And he said, and be honest with you, you get a lot of calls.
Yeah.
And quite often these players are guards, and you're always looking for a big guy or, a scorer or whatever, and so I said, "Well, all right." I said, "He can walk on." I said, "But we don't have a scholarship available." And after one semester, we gave him a scholarship because he was that good. And he was runner-up for the point guard of the year. It was the Bob Cousy Award. And he was runner-up for that award as the best small point guard in the country. Wow. And he just had a way to make our team click. He was terrific. And I'm glad that Charlie called us. I'll tell you that.
Was Carlos Yates already there when you showed up, or did you recruit him also?
No, Carlos wasn't there.
He was there. Okay.
I'll tell you, the main reason we got Carlos Yates, Rick Barnes. Rick was unbelievable. He became so close to Stu Vetta, the coach at Flint Hill. Later down the road, Kevin Durant went to Texas because of Rick Barnes' friendship with Stu Vetta. But anyway, back then we'd go to Flint Hill, which was right 3 minutes from campus, right across 66. And but at the time, it came down to Purdue, and Gene Keady was a coach at Purdue, and Mason. And on our last visit, I'll never forget this, Rick Barnes had the trophy case set up with Carlos Yates' jersey and his number, the George Mason jersey, and we had a big frame picture of Carlos Yates as if he had just graduated from George Mason, and it had all the things listed: All-American, all-time leading scorer, and it went on. And so at the end of our last visit, we walked by the trophy case and we made sure that he would see it. And then we planted that vision in his mind of how good he could accomplish things at George Mason. All his dreams could come true at George Mason. And it was amazing. That was the same time that Ralph Sampson, the same years of Ralph Sampson and Patrick Ewing. And Carlos Yates scored more points than either one of those two players. Carlos was an incredible athlete, strong. And I mean, we played at Duke. And I still think, you can correct me on this, Julian, but I still think he has the record for most points scored by an opponent in Cameron Indoor Stadium.
Is that right? Wow.
I think he scored 36 or 38. And I think that record still stands today. You'll have to check on that.
Yeah.
We came within, we were close to beating them until the last 2 minutes. And it was just a 4 or 5 point game. But
what was he like?
Huh?
What was he like personally? Was he a nice guy, Carlos Yates?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He had a great personality.
Yeah.
People love Carlos Yates.
Yeah.
And Gene Katie could never figure out why Carlos Yates came to George Mason University. I guess that was the first time I really got to know Gene Katie. It's through that, and I'm still friends with him today. But
Yeah.
that was the first really. He started the thought process that you could have great basketball at George Mason, because he was Rookie of the Year and Player of the Year a couple times, and he changed the whole thing for us.
So from my point of view, I was class of 84, high school, or Robinson right down the street. So we'd go to all your games. And I remember going to the PE building. And to me, the environment was never anywhere near as good when I moved to the Patriots Center. It was great at the PE building. I remember watching Dick Tarrant, Richmond, and Johnny Newman. You had, like you said, David Robinson, James Madison, I think, had Linton Towns maybe, and Derek Steele, a guy that was from around here. But the games were awesome. They were the gym was loud. It was a great environment to watch college basketball.
We got together and I learned this from Russ Potts from the University of Maryland, but I tried to target how we could get to fill the arena, get more people in it, and it was from the families, the students, and then the people outside, the faculty and staff, and then people in the community. And we just tried to put numbers on it and speculate how we could fill that gym. And that's how it started back then. It was great to have worked for Lefty Driesell, because he was hands-on and tried to think of everything that would affect winning basketball games. Okay, and we started doing our weight training at Maryland before it was really a thing to do. And the promotion of our attendance was unbelievable at Maryland, and I picked up on that at George Mason. And so a lot of things that we did early on made a big difference. And then when we finally played in the Patriots Center, we played Maryland that first game. I don't know if you remember that, but we played the University of Maryland first game in the Patriots Center. And Len Bias had 36 against us, but we had a chance to win the game at the buzzer. And we were down, I think, 1 point. It was a close game. We ran a play, and we got exactly the shot we wanted, wide open right at the free throw line, and we just missed it. But that year we played Georgetown and West Virginia in the Patriots Center. We had, I felt it was important to play good teams, and we did that first season in the Patriots Center.
Yeah, did you? What was my friend Mike Dufrene like? Mike Dufrene like the coach. Now, I did a podcast with Mike, and Mike is he's one of these tough guys where he remembers everything an authority figure in his life, any advice you gave him or any slight you gave him, he remembers it. So I remember in my podcast, I couldn't believe his memory for things that happened to him in his career, like punishments or promotions, whatever it was. But what was he like to coach?
That's why he's so successful as a principal. He's such a people person. I mean, he loves what he does. He loves life. He loves, being a principal. And he soaked up everything when it came to coaching and the way we did things. I mean, he remembers things that I forgot. And we've always stayed close, and he stayed close with Coach Barnes. And he's just one of those unique guys that listens. And he not only listens, but he understands what you're trying to do with the program and the players. And he was he's just an unusual guy that you never forget. And it's no mystery to me why he's so successful now as a principal and at high schools. And he's a unique guy, unique.
He was also a great coach when he was in the coaching. I used to referee his games before I knew who he was. He married a girl from my high school that I knew well, but for some reason I never really knew that they were married, I guess. But so I used to do his games, and his teams were so well prepared, played so hard. Oftentimes they weren't the most talented teams in the world, even though he did have some talented teams as well. But they always played really well. So
that was when we prepared for a game. I mean, Coach Driesell would never leave any stone unturned. I mean, he might have a clipping from a newspaper or anything to gain a little bit of an edge. And we were very thorough in recruiting and preparing our teams. And I think probably Mike picked up on that.
Yeah. All right. And just to go back to Maryland one time, and they showed this on the documentary, but I've seen this clip on YouTube quite often because I love it. This time of year, when the Maryland finally won the ACC against Duke, and the Amen chorus plays in the last 20 seconds of the game. Right. And then they show Miss Driesell dancing up in the audience, and then the camera goes to Coach K's wife right after that. Right. It's a great moment. Do you remember that moment?
Yeah, I do. It was Coach Driesell, and you know, it was a family thing with Coach. I mean, it was Joyce Driesell. It was Chuck Driesell when he was young, and it was a family thing. But the players and coaches and staff, they were included in the family stuff. I mean, we'd go to his house for a lot of dinners. He had a basketball court out back with the Maryland logo on it, and then we'd get down to the beach place on the shore in Delaware or Maryland, and Coach would just invite the team down. Everything he did revolved around basketball and family, and I could see them dancing in the stands. It's just a testimony to what Coach was all about.
Yeah. Well, so Coach, you ended up going to Cal State Long Beach after George Mason. Was it a tough decision to leave Mason? I mean, you've built this program up. You had a great staff working with you. The Patriots Center is built now.
I know.
And then you go for. Was it a tough decision?
What happened is I had interviewed for the VCU job in that spring, and looking back at the time when I didn't get that job, and I thought I was going to get it because I just felt I would. But then I look back and I'm thinking they had to interview people to go through the process. And I was one of those people they interviewed, but I really wasn't the main guy. And I came back from that and I said, I'm never going to interview again. I'm staying at George Mason the rest of my life. So about 3 or 4 days later, Seth Greenberg calls me. He's at Miami. And Long Beach State just hired a new athletic director. Okay. And he happened to be the best man in Seth's wedding. And so Seth calls me, he said, Joe, he said, Corey Johnson just got the AD's job at Long Beach State. He said, I can get you that job and I'll go with you. And I said, I'm not interested. I don't want to do it. I'm going to stay at George Mason. And he said, no, just come look. And he kept working me. So finally I said, okay, I'll come out there and visit you and talk with you about it. And it happened to be that the weekend I went out there was the Long Beach Grand Prix, and it was unbelievable. So I decided to take the job, and we turned that thing around in 1 year. It was a great year in my coaching career to go into Long Beach State. And I think Greenberg just put the sales job on me, and I decided to do it. And that's just how it came about. But it's I don't know. Sometimes change is good, and maybe it was the right decision. But then Rick Barnes came and took over at George Mason, and then he only stayed a year. But that's what happened. Yeah. And I'm not sorry that I did it, but I hate leaving the players that I left because they were just a great group. But that's how that all came about.
Yeah. There's one more, before we get to Colorado, there's one more Mason player I want to ask you about, because I played against him in high school, is Brian Miller. Do you remember Brian was at Mount Vernon? He was an incredible shooter. He was one of the hardest working guys I had ever known in terms of off-season practice. He wasn't like he was always a good player, but he wasn't a huge scorer. And then his senior year, I've never seen a kid improve that much. I think he may have averaged 30 a game and took his team to the state semifinals. What do you remember about Brian Miller?
He's a quiet assassin.
Yeah.
He was just a quiet guy, but he was a very good shooter. And he worked hard in the off season with the weights and the shooting and practice. And he was a very good player for George Mason. And I just remember that, and I met him years later, and he was coaching AAU basketball and all that. And he hadn't changed. And I guess normally you don't, but he just was really a workaholic. He made himself good because he wasn't like a totally gifted athlete athletically, but again, he could shoot and he knew how to get his shot off. And so he was a good player for us.
He was shooting deep shots before people were doing that because there was no 3-pointer. And high school, he was hitting 25 footers.
I know.
Layups.
It's been different little 3-point shot in those days.
Well, let's talk about coaching Colorado. And Colorado, the Big 8 was not really a basketball conference so much. It was such a football conference. But you took the job for the Buffaloes. What was that experience like?
Well, looking back on it, you can't change. Like, you got to live your life forward, like I said. But looking back, that was I love my years at Colorado. Don't get me wrong. That's a beautiful state, and it was a great campus and all that. And hanging out with Bill McCartney, the football coach. There was a lot of good memories of Colorado, but in reality, it was a very difficult job going there. Think about this, Julian. Oklahoma, Billy Tubbs was a coach. Kansas, Roy Williams was a coach.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Kansas State, Dana Altman was a coach. Okay. Oklahoma State, Eddie Sutton was a coach.
I forgot they had all those great coaches in that conference.
Hey, Iowa State, Johnny Orr. Missouri, Norm Stewart. And in Nebraska was Danny Nee. But I guess those first 6 that I mentioned are mostly Hall of Fame coaches.
Yeah.
And they did whatever they could to get basketball players. And so it was a football conference. And winning in that league from Colorado was tough. When I went there was a 56 games on the road losing streak. We broke it, but that just shows that the basketball wasn't a big deal. It was just I think in looking back, it probably was not a great move at the time, because you can win at Long Beach State every year within 50 miles of Long Beach, some of the best players in the country. And so, in Long Beach was, even the players that didn't go to UCLA or USC, they'd come to Long Beach State. And so, Jerry Tarkanian proved that, and Lute Olson proved that. And so there are a lot of good coaches that have gone to Long Beach and won. Seth Greenberg won after that. I left Lucius Harris, NBA player, when I left there, and with the player for Utah, Bryant Russell.
Oh, that's right, Bryant Russell.
He was on that. I left those 2 guys when I left there. So there was a good team coming, and Seth did a great job with them, and they went on to play in the NCAAs. But in looking back, it was a tough job to go to Colorado and leave Long Beach State.
Yeah.
I'd have to rethink it again if I was there now.
Yeah.
But
So
that's
that was a
kind of
great.
how it was.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. There was a great ESPN special about Bill McCartney that we talked about, and that your friend Derek Wittenberg, I guess, was involved in the production. And he was a very interesting character, very evangelical, just very different. And, a lot of times if a person with that kind of character wears that on the sleeve or is too public with it, people don't know how to react to it. and I found him compelling. I found him, authentic. Actually, I really enjoyed that special. What was he like from your perspective, Bill McCartney, the football coach?
He was genuine, down to earth, believed in the faith, and a strong Christian. And he didn't see color now. He just saw people, because he recruited out of Los Angeles, and he changed that, he changed that athletic department through his players. And it's a great story. I'd encourage anybody that hasn't seen that Bill McCartney ESPN special, that tape, to watch it. But I'd go on trips in the spring on an athletic tour of the state, and we'd travel together. And he was just unbelievable. He just, Rick Barnes, and this kind of reminds me of a story. Rick Barnes and McCartney was like this, spent so much time with his players, his team. And Rick Barnes does the same thing. Like, his office is in the where they practice. He has an office here where they go and lift weights, where they go and get something to eat. And he spends most of his time where the players go. He has another office in the athletic department, and his administrative assistant runs that office, but he spends most of his time in the athletic facility where his players are. And that's where they come. He's there. And McCartney was like that. And the one thing he did that I'll never forget, he said, Joe, when I came to Colorado, he said, he came to Colorado from Michigan. Michigan's big rivalry, as everybody knows, Ohio State in football. He said, I needed to do the same thing in the Big 8 for football. And so I picked Nebraska as that team to hate, so we could get, to get the interest in football. And that's what he did. And it became a big rivalry. And when he traveled to Lincoln, Nebraska to play a football game on a Saturday, he would practice at home, and then he would get on the plane and he would come into Lincoln, Nebraska after dark. And someone asked him about that one time. He said, well, there's nothing to see here. Why would I come up here when it's daylight? And he always putting the needle in Nebraska. But he developed that rivalry. And so, you can learn from, when Coach Driesell came to Maryland, who he became friends with? George Allen. He wanted to know what George Allen did to be great. And he would visit with him at Redskins Park. And that's the same type thing that George at Colorado, because McCartney wanted to create a situation that would improve football, and Coach Driesell wanted to improve something that would improve basketball. He went to a football coach. So great men do great things.
Yeah, just for our younger viewers who may not know, George Allen was a coach who came to Washington in '71, followed the great Vince Lombardi, and he believed in veterans, and he went out and got veterans because he wanted to win now. The future is now. And he turned around a perennial loser and made the Redskins a great franchise. But I agree with you. I agree with you, because I like to read a lot of biographies and stuff, just because it helps you, see what makes people great and what works. And
George Allen was the head football coach at Long Beach State when I was there.
Oh, that's right. He was. I forgot he was there before the Rams.
He came to our games. That's right. He came to our games. And I remember one game we won a particular night. And the next morning I came in, I went by his office because I love to talk with him. And he said, he goes like this, licks his hand together like he does.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
He said, Coach, he said, your team played a great defense last night. He said, defense wins games. He said, I was really impressed with your defense last night. And he said, what did you do to celebrate? I said, well, Coach, I didn't really do anything. He said, Joe, he said, you always got to celebrate your victories and then get on to the next one. He said, I said, well, Coach, what do you do when you won big victories? What did you do? He said, I go home and get a big dish of vanilla ice cream.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it was great to meet somebody like that and talk with them.
Yeah. Well, you've worked with some great coaches in your lives, both that you coach under and also that work for you. If you had to give a young Joe Harrington advice, is getting started in the game right now, what advice would you give? And I know we don't want to look back. What are things that you wish you could have known as a young coach? Or even
I wish
young
I'd spent more. I wish I'd spent more time with the great coaches, and when they meet, be there. I mean, I was close to like Jerry Tarkanian and Lute Olson, and I mentioned those two, but there were a lot of coaches. Like I was on the staff in 1990 for Mike Krzyzewski's USA basketball team that played in the World Championships. And the assistant coaches were Jim Boeheim, PJ Colissimo, and Mike Krzyzewski, the head coach, and myself. And I wish I'd spent more time with them, because I think it's important to have strong mentors. So when you have decisions to make, that you can get the advice from people that have walked that walk before you and learn from those people. And I think I just wish I'd spent more time with the people that I remain friends with a lot of them. I wish I just spent more time talking basketball, talking life, and that. I think that's so important. And that's, I look at Kim English, and he's got he's been around some great coaches, and he's just. I think you can learn from the people that have won. What have they done consistently year in, year out? Like Bobby Cremins, he had a certain style, what he did to win championships, and it's very interesting to be around a Bobby Cremins, and to listen to hear his theories about how to get it done. And I was around Roy Williams a lot from being in the Big Eight, and Billy Tubbs. I mean, I rubbed shoulders, and people in basketball are very, you're part of a special group. There aren't many basketball coaches, Division I head coaches, only 300 and some, right? And so there aren't many. You might be want to kick their butt, but when it's all said and done, they'll visit and they'll share their stories and their beliefs in basketball. I just wish I'd spent more time developing that mentorship. It doesn't have to be a lot of them, but like I wish I'd spent more time with Rick Barnes after he'd left. After I left Colorado, because Rick's a smart guy, and that's one of the things that you ask a question, and that's how I'd answer it.
Yeah. So last question, Coach, and this has been great. What do you think about where basketball is now, the state of college basketball and the recruiting? Do you like where basketball is now? Do you prefer the way it was when maybe like in your George Mason or even your University of Maryland days?
When you were watching about ACC tournament films and all, and I watched those old players, and there's some players that could play in any era, whether it be
David Thompson,
or Art Heyman, or Lenny Rosenblum. There are people like that, like a McMillan. They can play pretty much in any era because they add something to the mix that will always be needed. The game has changed. The three-point shot has completely changed it. And when I coached with the Raptors, Dell Curry was one of the players on that team. And of course, his two sons, Seth and Steph, they were in the Air Canada Center practice facility all the time shooting. And the three-point shot has changed the game so much. And for the good and the bad. Because some of the fundamentals have been lost. And we have people shooting threes that really not capable of shooting threes on a consistent basis and make them. So it's changed the game. But if you don't embrace it and use it, then you're going to fall behind, because it is here and it's going to stay. Yeah. But there's going to be a couple of big guys come around, and they're going to start getting the ball back inside, and then the three-point shot they'll score from inside out. And so it's always changing. And I think coaches like Mike Krzyzewski, not just because he's a great coach and he's won all those games, but he's adjusted to the change, the recruiting change, and the players that have changed the game. He's adjusted it, and better than anybody that I think in college basketball, when you think about it. The one and done, he took advantage of that. Yeah. And so I think that's how I'd answer that question as well.
When I used to go, I'm a big fan of the state high school basketball tournament. I go to Virginia every year. And before the three-point stripe, or even after, when the first 5 or 6 years before we really embraced it, you'd watch a tournament and you'd watch a team impose its will on the other team. Now, in the state tournament, you don't necessarily know the teams are so much, but you can tell. You'd watch third quarter or so. The team will start to impose its will. The big guys will start getting rebounds, put it back up, and you can kind of tell who the winner is going to be. The three-pointer has changed all that. You don't really impose your will that way anymore. The play comes from outside. And college basketball, the mid-majors have a big chance at and during the NCAA tournament, even though I guess they've always had a certain chance, but and that's not just a three-pointer as well. But I miss the part of the basketball, and I guess the same thing can say for football when the running game you can impose your will. I miss seeing those moments when a team would do that. You don't see that in basketball anymore.
Well, these teams that have 2 or 3 good three-point shooters, they're tough to beat. I mean, you might be able to shut down or make it hard for one three-point shooter and maybe 2 3-point shooters, but if you get 3 and they can carry a game and they can change the game quickly. And that's exciting. And I think you have to take advantage of that.
Yeah, you have to.
And that's what, like I alluded to earlier, that's what Mike Krzyzewski has done.
Yeah.
And other coaches are doing it as well. I just use him as an example just because he's retiring this year and everybody's talking about Coach K, but
yeah,
he's pretty unique and special.
He did adjust, and he did embrace the folks that aren't going to stay around very long and stop focusing so much on the 4-year scholar athlete. But anyway, Coach, look, I've always admired you from afar. I went to UVA, and you always reminded me of Terry Holland. You both care. You both carried yourself with so much dignity. Both won, and I got to see you at close range because I was, like I said, we'd sit up there right behind the Mason bench. We like to try to hear what was going on, and we'd love to hear you and Dick Tarrant and Campanelli. There were so many good coaches that you went up against. And
I look back on the coaching days at George Mason and the time that I was there, and I did some things I'd love to take back, but at the time, it helped make a change in that program. I talked to Jay and Carolyn Marsh, and I'm thinking, I can't believe you guys put up with me in those early days, because there's no way we weren't going to have a locker room or an office or whatever. We had to have it. I just would go after it with them, but it all worked out. And I'm just glad that I had my 7 years at George Mason, because it was a great time in my life.
Yeah. Well, look, Coach. Well, thanks again for doing this. I don't know if you're a local, but I'm in the DC area. If you're ever in town and want to meet for lunch or coffee, I'd love to do it. So
I will take you up on that for sure.
Yeah, so you have my contact information. But this was great stories. I love those 70s ACC stories too. I mean, they're amazing. So there's lots of laughs.
I know it. Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed my time with you.
Yeah, this was great, Coach, and a real treat for me. So have a great rest of your day, and please just keep in touch.
All right, thank you.
All right, Coach, thank you.